After recently uploading a video featuring black powder revolvers, someone asked me how I first became interested in black powder firearms. As far as firearms go, I suppose I've owned my fair share of black powder weapons over the last 50 years. My fascination with these primitive firearms dates back to when I was just a kid. At that time, The Adventures of Davy Crockett was the hit series on TV. My friend Rich and I never missed a single weekly episode. One day we managed to get our hands on a can of black powder. As I recall, we commandeered it from Rich's father's reloading supplies. This, of course, led to our earliest attempts to unlock the mysteries of black powder. Our first experiment consisted of placing a small amount of black powder on my bicycle seat and igniting it with a match. This experiment concluded with the discovery that a lighted match serves as an excellent catalyst for igniting black powder. The secondary part of our discovery is that black powder can sometimes have a delayed ignition time, compelling someone with a lighted match to lean in for a closer look. Then, poof, no eyebrows. I don't exactly recall why we decided to use a bicycle seat as part of the experiment, but having no eyebrows and a hole burned into my bicycle seat proved to be great conversation openers with girls at school. It wasn't long before we attempted to build our own black powder firearms. At first, they were small and crude, but as we progressed, they became large and crude. We never did come up with a satisfactory trigger mechanism. One Friday afternoon, while on our way home from school, we passed a construction site where a number of new homes were being built. We both saw it at the same time, a piece of discarded textile sewer pipe. One end still had the bell joint on it, looking for all the world like the crown of a cannon barrel. Seems to me the idea struck us at the same time. We're building ourselves a cannon. It wasn't long after dragging the chunk of sewer pipe home, we figured out that we didn't have enough black powder left for firing a weapon of this magnitude. The only place to buy more was at our local firearms war surplus and outdoor supply store. The proprietor, Mr. Kelly, carried a decent supply of it in stock, but we weren't sure that grumpy old curmudgeon would sell a couple of scruffy kids something as potentially dangerous as black powder. So, our attempt to get him to sell us some had to be cloaked in a bit of subterfuge. The next day we casually sauntered into the store with our shopping list in hand. Mr. Kelly says, "You boys just here to finger the merchandise, or do you actually have money to spend?" I say, "Wretch, why don't you go ahead and read Mr. Kelly our list?" Wretch pulls out the list and tells him, "We need 50 feet of parachute cord, 1 ammo can, 1 railroad flare, 2 pounds of black powder, and 2 of those Davy Crockett coonskin caps." Mr. Kelly eyeballed us for a long minute before saying, "I'm not sure if I should. But what the heck, I promised old Jake Teeters I'd hold those last 2 coonskin caps for his boys. But I suppose I'll let you 2 have them. Now how much black powder was that? 2 pounds? In fairness to Mr. Kelly, he did warn Wretch and I about the hazards of black powder before selling it to us. If I recall, his exact words were, "If either of you set that stuff off near my store, I'll peel your hides." Since having your hide peeled tends to hurt quite a bit, we decided to abide by Mr. Kelly's warning. Thinking back on it now, maybe we should have purchased flak jackets and GI helmets instead of those coonskin caps. Bright and early the next morning we began building our cannon. We commandeered an old baby carriage, a couple of wood planks, mixed up some concrete for a breech plug, and lashed it all together with plenty of parachute cord. We had it finished in no time. We determined that a croquet ball would serve as a projectile, and placed one inside the ammo can along with our recently purchased railroad flare and 2 1-pound cans of black powder. We could hardly wait to test fire our magnificent weapon of mass destruction, so we donned our new coonskin caps and headed off to the nearby golf course with our cannon in tow. When we arrived, the golf course appeared deserted. After a quick look around to be sure, we wheeled the cannon into position and began the loading procedure. Rich dumped in about a half a can of black powder and says, "Think that's enough?" "Nah," I tell him. "Better dump in a little more. This croquet ball is kind of heavy." So down the barrel went a crap load more. The croquet ball fit kind of tight and had to be rammed down the barrel with a chunk of broomstick. We finally had to pound on the broomstick with a rock for a spell before the ball finally seated. We then took up positions on either side of our magnificent cannon. While I primed the flash hole, Wretch lit the flare. We glanced at each other for a moment and noticed we were both grinning like monkeys. A second later, I gave the command, "Fire," and Wretch touched the flare to the priming powder. The next thing I remember is coming to my senses some distance away from where it all started, flat on my back, disoriented, and smoldering. Wretch also lay smoldering in the nearby weeds. As quick as I could, I got up to see about Wretch. Felt as though I'd been hit by a truck while being stung by 1,000 bees. The cannon was no longer there. Only small chunks of sewer pipes, some wood chips, and the twisted remains of a baby carriage remained. A ring of scorched turf actually marked the spot where the cannon had once stood. I finally managed to get Wretch onto his feet, and we limped over to a nearby utility shed and sat down in the shade to inspect our wounds. As my luck usually ran, it wasn't too long before the deputy sheriff drove up. The deputy got out of his car, hoisted up his gun belt, and slowly walked over to us while surveying the smoldering debris. The look on his face told me we're probably going to jail. He looks at us sitting there, looks back at the smoldering debris, and asks, "You boys know anything about an explosion out this way?" I didn't say a word. I couldn't even come up with a decent lie at this point. But my buddy Wretch, ever so quick to compound a catastrophe, asked, "What explosion?" The deputy leans forward and in a loud voice says, "A damn big explosion. Know anything about one?" It's not that we were well versed in our right to remain silent at that age. It just seemed prudent. Had my mother been asking that same question, I'd have likely spilled my guts immediately. My mother had the ability to make a seasoned Spanish Inquisitioner look like a rank amateur. For example, dinner time the very evening after the black powder and bicycle seed experiment. When called to dinner that evening, I casually sat down at the table wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, hoping she wouldn't notice. The minute I sat down, she informed me, in no uncertain terms, that I was in serious violation of dinner table propriety, and I was to remove the hat and sunglasses immediately. The instant I did, she expertly asked the very question black powder experimenters everywhere hate to answer. "What in the hell happened to your eyebrows?" Rest assured, she got the truth out of me pretty quick, and I was of course sent to my room to contemplate what she thought about the whole situation. Obviously, that particular lecture had barely stopped reverberating through the rafters before I was already contemplating future experiments. And that leads us back to our story. Anyway, the deputy stood there sternly looking us over for what seemed like forever. He finally says, "Tell you boys what, if you come up with any information about that explosion, you'll give me a call, right?" We assured him that we would. With that, he turned and headed back towards his patrol car. He pauses and asks over his shoulder, "I don't expect there'll be another one, do you?" "No, sir, absolutely not," we assured him. Just before getting back into his patrol car, the deputy noticed something laying in the weeds, which turned out to be the singed remains of Wretch's coonskin cap. The deputy walks over and nudges it with the tip of his boot, looks back at us and says, "Too bad about your dog." With that, he just shook his head, got back into his patrol car, and drove away. To this day, I've never understood why he didn't haul our butts off to jail. Years later, while undergoing a routine physical examination, the doctor noticed a couple of small lumps just under my hide. Once removed, he was surprised to see they were tiny pieces of textile pipe. He didn't ask how they got there, and I didn't say. Still find one working its way out from time to time. Needless to say, if you ever need advice about building or shooting black powder firearms, I'm always here for you.